Your defining moments are what make you who you are. And when we are successful in those life-defining moments, we never go back to being that person that we were. The hardest steel is forged in the hottest fire. You know, that's what it's all about, man.
Welcome back. This is the David Johnson Show, and this is a story about people. But more importantly, this is a story about leadership, relationships, and the relentless drive to accomplish the mission. We are joined today by Rear Admiral, retired Hal Pittman. Thanks for coming on the show, sir.
Thank you, David. Great to be here.
You have a long story, and whenever people like you come on the show, it's always hard for me to have a pinpoint in where in your life to start, but let's kick this off somewhat from the beginning. Paint a picture of your maybe early years right up to joining the Navy.
Sure. Yeah. So, you know what? I grew up in a very blue collar neighborhood, you know, sort of lower middle class, and went to public school all my life, and you know, I went to a community college. Started out at community college. After high school, I was an athlete in high school and a class officer, but I went to community college, and then I transferred to a state university in North Carolina, a college back then that no one had ever really heard of. That was Appalachian State University. Now they're pretty well known for their football team, but back then they weren't really well known. And out of there, it was during my time there that I decided that I wanted to be a Navy officer. And so I applied to officer candidate school, and I was rejected. And that hurt, but it was okay. I decided to enlist in the Navy because I felt that, you know, I felt that by my own personal ability that I would be able to advance, and I would be able to become an officer even if I were to enlist. And so I did that.
So it was always the goal to be an officer. You had that goal from day one of enlistment to eventually.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That was it. It wasn't something that developed. It was always my plan. And because I didn't reach that in plan A, I sort of went to plan B.
Sure.
And so I enlisted, and you know, I was originally going to go in under the nuclear power program. But then I did my physical, and they told me I was colorblind. So there was about 3 jobs that I could actually do, and which also would limit me later on, you know, in the Navy as an officer. So I wasn't going to be able to drive ships or fly planes. And so I became a Navy journalist, and I went through the training for print and broadcast journalism, and I was assigned overseas. And because of my you know, evaluations and performance, you know, as a junior enlisted guy and then as a petty officer, I was able to eventually get that opportunity to go to officer candidate school.
You had to apply, get accepted still at that stage?
Yeah, go through the application process and get accepted. And OCS was challenging because it was academically rigorous. And it was more rigorous than sort of, you know, anything that I had done up until that point. It was more rigorous than college. And, you know, I did a lot of late nights, a lot of, you know, midnight, all-nighters for tests and things like that. And so I ended up finishing OCS. I graduated in the bottom half of my class. I was in the summer class, so it was all these engineers who were coming out of college and, you know, really bright people. And, you know, I was sort of in the bottom half of that group.
Well,
and so, you know, but it's about just grinding on, just continuing to, you know, do what you got to do to get to your goal. And so I, you know, got through OCS, and I went to my training in supply and logistics, spent about 6 months there. And then I went to my first ship in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii.
Oh, nice. You know, it's a funny story. I remember the first time we met, one of them, we were having brunch, and you said, I graduated the bottom half of my class, but one of the first to make flag officers.
Yeah, well, I was graduated in probably the lower 40%. academically, and I was the first person in my OCS class to make flag.
Do you feel OCS prepares you to take on leadership roles day one? I mean, are you taught a lot about leadership?
So I would tell you this, David. I think the U.S. military in general is this great sort of leadership laboratory. It is a great system.
Laboratory.
It is a great system for taking young people, young American men and women from average backgrounds and training them to do extraordinary things. There's not one particular training or element of military service that necessarily prepares you for leadership, but I think it's about putting all the tools together over a period of time. And the military does a great job of taking young people, impressionable young people, teaching them a basic skill set, and then loading them with responsibility over a period of time and taking them to the next level and growing them.
Okay.
So the military is a system that grows leaders.
Interesting.
So did OCS? OCS gave me some very basic tools, and then I went to the fleet, and it was actually then about learning to actually do the job. You know, I had some ideas about how to do the job, but doing the job is largely about interacting with people and the teams that you work with. So here I was a junior officer, and having been an enlisted guy, I understood this idea that there were going to be subject matter experts, you know, crusty old chief petty officers and enlisted leaders that knew how to do this thing and had been doing it for a long, long time. And I had not. So I was malleable, and I was willing to take their advice and their counsel on how to proceed and sort of the different specifics of the business of logistics on a ship at sea.
Besides that point of looking at those experts on the enlisted side that have been in a long while, do you feel being enlisted prior to officer made you a better officer?
I think it did. Yeah, I think it did, because it's all about humble roots. I mean, I came from very humble roots, and I'll never forget where I came from growing up on the streets of Baltimore. I mean, and so that helps shape you. But I think there's some other things that guide and help contribute to your development as a leader in the military. And so, you've heard folks like General Petraeus talk about sort of the tenets of the strategic leader, and that's the execution of leadership. What leaders do sort of on a macro level. And those things are very, very important for being an effective leader. It's about getting the big picture right, communicating the big picture across your team, then executing, the mission, putting all the pieces into place, and then assessing and going back and doing it over again. Getting that big picture right, what you need to do, and continuing forward. It's a continuous cycle. So that's about the execution piece. But I'm also, I really believe in the values piece. I talk about sometimes what I call values-based leadership, and that's, understanding what your own core values are as a human being and being able to distribute those over the execution of leadership as a system, if you will.
When did all that start kicking in, though? I mean, like you said, gradually military trains leaders, you graduate. That wasn't day one. I mean,
absolutely not. No way. No way. This is the culmination of, 30 years of a military career, and then a career going forward in the civilian sector. So, again, the military is a system that takes young people and does extraordinary things with them. And over time, you build people up. And so, you get more skills, you learn to lead at a higher level. And then if you're successful, the military moves you to the next level. And if you're not successful, depending on at what point you are in your career, you either stay there or maybe you get out and you go do something else.
It's like you said, a culmination of 30 plus years. What's the responsibility level of somebody, like your first position outside of OCS? What level of responsibility are you playing at that field?
As a junior officer, regardless of what service you are in, I mean, you're going to have a group of people, that work for you or with you. And, so on board a ship, I was an assistant supply officer, and I had a department of about 30 some people.
Okay.
And I was responsible for their training and development. And then I had specific teams that I was leading, and then others that I worked sort of in a matrixed way with, because I was still their division officer, regardless of whether they were reporting to me for day-to-day assignments or not. So, and most junior officers are going to have that same kind of level of experience. They're going to have a handful of enlisted troopers that they'll work with. They're going to have those senior enlisted leaders that are technical professionals, in the business, whatever area that they're in, whether it's operations or supply or intelligence or whatever. And so, but the one thing, so listening is very, very important, David. So even when you're a 22-year-old green officer, it's about listening, because the people around you are the ones that are going to be advising you. And your job is sort of to sift through the different pieces of information in order to make cogent decisions on a leadership level. So you got to, and even at the 4-star level, I mean, the best 4-star leaders that I have served with bring all their staff around them, and they say, okay, team, here's the situation. And they lay it out, and they say, I need your best military advice, and those staffers go around one by one offering perspective, to that 4-star general or admiral.
And at the end of the day,
that's the way it's done.
He or she has to make the call, the final decision.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's that's the responsibility of a senior leader, is, they're the ones that are going to shape that decision and that strategy moving forward. But the best ones are always highly collaborative, and taking that, taking in what the team provides and distilling that, and then coming up with a cogent response to whatever the issue is.
I don't know if there's a politically correct way to ask this, so I'm just going to ask you. There are some people that can't do that, though. I mean, at that level.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there are some people that
absolutely.
do not have that. I don't know if what the word is, the, internal fortitude, but don't have the ability to make that decision. I mean, have you seen that along the way?
Well, so I think, it depends on whether you're talking about the military or the civilian sector. I would tell you this: since the military is a system and it raises up people from all different walks of life, all different backgrounds, eventually they wouldn't be in that position if the military as a system didn't think that they were capable of being able to function at that level.
Great point.
Now, once in a while, somebody slips through. You occasionally have a bad apple, and you see this, because there are some that go to command and end up being relieved of their command because of mistakes, for whatever reason. So that happens. But that's about accountability and keeping the system on track. So, military leaders are brought up to be fair, firm, and consistent. Okay. It's not about your emotions. Your emotions are out of it. None of us can fully divorce ourselves from our emotions, but it's about being fair, firm, and consistent.
And do you feel military specific, especially maybe at the higher levels, those decisions are being made to support a mission? So I say, I have to support this mission. What decision do I have to make that can best support X, Y, and Z?
Well, I mean, what do they say? Mission first, people always.
Right.
And so it's taking into consideration the health, well-being, and morale of the troops, but at the same time, you've got a very, very definitive mission to get done. And this is, in the military, it's a life or death mission, right?
Sure.
It is the defense of our nation. And all of us raised our right hand and swore an oath to defend the country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And so, and there's a camaraderie that's built around that mission at a high level. So, and that's something that you may never get in a civilian setting. That's one of the things that veterans are so disappointed with, or often disappointed with, when they transition to the outside, because they don't have that same camaraderie that they had in uniform.
Sure.
Because you're shoulder to shoulder with the person next to you, focusing on a, big, hairy, audacious goal, whatever that is, a really, really important mission. And, it's life or death stuff. It's a big deal.
We're going to definitely get into that at the end. We were talking right before camera, and you said life-defining moments. What were some of your early life-defining moments after OCS?
Yeah. So, David, I would tell you I have a philosophy that your defining moments are what make you who you are. So everybody kind of moves along in life on a certain equilibrium. And then there's these things that happen to us, and they push us harder and they stretch us farther than we ever imagined. And when we are successful in those life-defining moments, we never go back to being that person that we were.
Because you've been tested and proven to
Yeah,
yourself you can
yeah,
do it.
yeah. You know, what is it? The hardest steel is forged in the hottest fire. You know, that's what it's all about, man. And so I'll give you an example. When I was a Navy commander, I was at the U.S. Naval Forces Central Command, 5th Fleet in Bahrain, and I was the public affairs chief there.
And for us that don't know, what a commander is
That's
a
a
what?
lieutenant colonel.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, lieutenant colonel. And so I was the public affairs chief at the forward component of the Navy, focused in on Middle East operations. And there was a General John Abizaid, who had taken over from Tommy Franks after the drive into Baghdad in 2003. He was looking for somebody to be his public affairs chief, and he was asking for a 1-star general. And and I was at 05. I was a lieutenant colonel level guy, and the Navy nominated me. And
Wow.
and I, because of my experiences and some other things, I ended up being the guy that was selected. And so I spent the next 2 years traveling around with General Abizaid in the back of his airplane on all these diplomatic missions and handling his communications and the communications of the entire theater,
Wow.
Iraq and Afghanistan, the overarching sort of public affairs position.
Let me interrupt 1 second. When you say
Yep.
communication, so communication, the outside world sees what you're putting out to the
that's correct.
public. Yeah.
That's the public communications.
Got it.
The public affairs, the media, the social media,
Correct. Okay.
the messaging about how,
Wow.
and, keeping that messaging aligned between your commander and your senior staffers and the White House and the Secretary of
And
Defense.
you're helping
and
to
all
have to
that.
craft this message.
That's right. That's right.
It's a big
And,
deal.
So you're sitting there in the boss's hip pocket, and you're saying, okay, boss, you're getting ready to go in and, meet with President Mubarak, and afterwards they're going to want to do a press briefing here in the palace in Cairo. So, we're going to talk about, the diplomatic relations and the strong, firm commitment of working with our allies in Egypt, et cetera, that kind of stuff. And also, making sure that there's an alignment and an integration with the messaging and the policy messaging from Washington, D.C., and, the Secretary of Defense's office, et cetera. So anyway, but the point was, David, was that particular job, that particular role, 2 years long, it was relentless, and it was intense, and it was, 4 hours of sleep a night, get up the next morning, get your situational awareness of what's happened so that you can give that best military advice to your leader and be able to, help that leader be successful. And so those 2 years were a defining moment in my career. They really stretched me to a point that I didn't realize that I could be at. And I grew from that.
And I'm sure that had to get your name on the radar, maybe, or kind of elevate you a little bit in other circles.
Yeah. I'll give you another one. On October 12th, 2000, I was working in Washington, D.C. at the Pentagon, and I got a call at like 6:30 in the morning from a gent who I worked with. He was telling me he wasn't going to be in. He was the duty officer in the Pentagon, and he was stuck there because USS Cole had been bombed by al-Qaeda terrorists in Aden, Yemen. And then that was the first call. And then the second call I got was about a half an hour later that said, pack your bags, you're going to Yemen. And so I ended up on the airplane with the Foreign Emergency Support Team, which is the crisis team that we send wherever there's an act of international terrorism that impacts, American people, American forces, et cetera. And so I went with the FES to Aden, Yemen, and I was there for, a month and a half or whatever it was, while we worked on the recovery of USS Cole. That was another one of those scenarios where, folded into a brand new organization, providing, the best guidance to the Joint Task Force Commander, and also to Ambassador Barbara Bodine, who was the American ambassador to Yemen at that time, and functioning sort of in that same role as an advisor on strategy and communication. That was another one of those situations where, you get it, you sleep when you can and work around the clock, because basically the mission's not going to stop and it's coming at you at 1,000 miles an hour. That stretches you. That, pulls you in a way that you're never going to go back to being who you were before that.
So to that point, I'm going to 180 us, and we're going to come back around full circle. And I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, sir. It's leadership is not always cotton candy and rainbows. I mean, we're humans. We have a life. There had to have been a time somewhat in your career where, yes, you were stretched from I have to accomplish this task, and I may not have done this task before, and you have to rise to the occasion. But talk to me a little bit about the personal aspect of leadership, because there had to have been a time or two you didn't want to lead. You're having a bad day, something's wrong at the house, and you still had to get up and lead people.
Everybody has a bad day, right?
Right.
I mean, but so I have a couple of values, David, that I emphasize to people that I think are key. And the first one is, honor and integrity, conducting yourself in the ways that your parents taught you to, on the playground. Be kind to other people. Listen. Say things like please and thank you. And just, don't be a jerk. That's one. Two is about the relationships you build with people, and oftentimes these are lifelong relationships. Relationships are about give and take, okay? If you're a taker all the time taking, you're not going to have relationships with people because, they're not going to want to interact with you.
Sure.
I have 24 people that reach out to me on a regular basis for mentoring advice and guidance. And it's because of those relationships that I've created with my team members over time. And, I'll get a call or an email. Invariably, I get 2 or 3 a week, when and some people say I give too much of my time, but that's okay because, this is what it's all about. The team members that you go into the fight with, you're bonded together for life. And then the third thing I would tell you, David, the third sort of big value that I think is really, really important is persistence. And we talked a little bit about that. You mentioned that up front. I've never been the smartest guy in the room. My success is, it flows from being persistent, always getting back up when you get knocked down, just being smart enough and being ferociously persistent, having an immense personal and professional will to whatever that mission is. You're going to attack that mission. You're going to get it done. Think of Winston Churchill, during the Battle of Britain. What did he say? Never give up, never give up, never, never, never. I mean, that's the kind of persistence that you got to bring to the table.
What is it, an upbringing that gave you that instilled that in you? Sports, your family? Because not everybody has that.
So, there's recently been a book called Grit, and it kind of, covers that same sort of thing, having that immense personal professional will. And I don't know if it's something that's, I think everybody has a certain amount of it, and it flows from your parents saying, make your bed, et cetera, et cetera. But it's about getting the mission done. It's about getting to the end state, achieving the goal.
And you always just internally knew that.
And being able to see that goal, even if it's, 1,000 miles down the road. My wife always jokes about how, when I was a really junior officer, I told her I was going to be an admiral, and she thought it was a big joke. But there was always a plan. Some people say, I was very fortunate and I worked hard and then I got promoted. And yeah, I did, but I always had a plan of, being that guy.
Yeah.
It was driven by a ferocious desire to succeed in my business.
You talk about people and your inner circle. climbing through the ranks, and we had this conversation at breakfast, I was saying at times there's a team that gets you from A to B and another team that gets you from B to C. Did you have to, I don't want to say leave people behind, that has a bad connotation to it, but climbing through the ranks in 30 years, did your circles change throughout those years? Am I asking that question
David,
properly?
I'm not 100% sure that I agree with you, and let me tell you why. I think when you create those mentoring relationships, you bring people along, okay? I mean, I've had teammates that I worked with, 25 years ago that I still collaborate with today. And in the military, I had people that I, worked with at one level that I made sure that they were at that next level with me. Because I trusted their judgment and I valued what they brought to the table, different, diverse perspectives. I have a young man that I work with now that was my exec 3 times on active duty.
And he's civilian now?
He's a civilian now, and we work together now.
That's awesome.
I think that, you have, as a leader, you have a duty to develop the people around you.
Wow.
Okay? And it's about bringing when you're entrusted with that very special role of being a leader, part of what you do is bring the people up around you.
It's all about people.
You collaborate with them. And when you're making a decision, I mentioned before about having this team around you that's advising you all the time. And I'll say this, I have what I consider a personal board of directors. I have people that I've worked with, that I've known for 40 years from junior high school, who are now tech CEOs and venture capitalists. And, I like, for example, I go to Florida, every couple of years and meet with a group that was at my junior high lunch table. Wow. And we have a weekend together, and they're all enormously successful. And they're all more successful than me, much more successful than I am. And, and I learn from these folks. And so you always have to have this mindset, a growth mindset of being able to learn from the people around you. So as a leader, you have a team around you to give you their best professional advice, but you also have to be open-minded and take your information from different sources, and then when you make that decision, whatever that decision is, say, here's what we're going to do, and here's my thinking. Always let your team know what you're thinking, because in that way they can better there's buy-in because they were part of the decision, one, but also, they know how you think, so they can be in simpatico.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, and you say these defining moments in life. I remember at breakfast one time you were telling me a story about, I think right before you made flag officer, and there was an opportunity in the civilian sector. Yeah. And you contemplated that for a little bit. We don't got to get into names and stuff, but can you tell me your thought process behind that?
So, and it was literally maybe 2 months before my board was set to meet to determine if I was going to be a flag officer or not. I was an 06. I was a captain, which is a colonel in other services. And I was in a command assignment. And a former boss of mine called me and said, hey, I want you to interview with this guy in New York. And, they're looking for someone to be president of this company that they've just acquired. It's a $40 million company.
Did you have feelers out, or they just contacted you out of the blue?
No, he reached, because it's one of my mentor-mentee relationship. A former boss of mine. I try to, stay in touch with my former bosses.
Sure.
And I seek their guidance and counsel periodically. And so he reached out to me and said, I want you to go interview with this guy in New York. And so I went up and I spent the day, and they offered me the job.
Wow.
And I had to, this was a tough decision, because it's like, okay, be president of a $40 million venture-backed company or continue on the same path. And, my former four-star boss said, hey, Hal, these opportunities don't come along very often, so I want you to really think about this. There's no guarantee that you're going to be a flag officer, but this is something that you could do really, really well at.
And your 20 was, I mean, you could have retired right then and there.
I could have
great
retired.
career, everything.
Yep.
You could have retired and jumped on that. Like you said, president of a venture-backed company. That is not a small deal. That is not, advertised in the classified ads. That's who you know.
Yeah. And so, and I'll tell you who gave me the defining guidance was my wife's cousin. My wife's cousin, Wayne Hewitt, had been CEO of a couple of different business units at General Electric under Jack Welch. And I talked to him, and he said to me, he said, Hal, he said, if you're being offered this opportunity, it means you'll be on that, radar in the corporate sector for other opportunities later on. He said, you're at that level. He said, so what you got to do is ask yourself if you're going to be comfortable giving up on your dream of serving in the military at the highest levels to go do that. He says, considering that, you'll probably have other opportunities later. That's going to be your choice. That's your dilemma.
How long did you contemplate on the decision before you?
Not very long. Not very long, because, one side is about, going to the corporate world. The other is really about, do I fulfill my dream and what I think is my destiny?
Yeah,
and I just had to stay on that path because I felt in my heart, and
wow.
I mean, the chance of being selected to get a star is very, 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 very low. But I just felt like I was on that path,
How long?
and so I turned that opportunity down, and I talked to a colleague of mine who was also a mentor of mine, and I told him about the opportunity, and he was eventually hired into that president's role.
So you made that referral?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I stayed on, and I was, selected for flag, and then I took my next assignment.
And how long from you turned it down to when you got the 1-star per se?
It was, on the next, selection board that met. So it was, I don't know. I was unofficially, well, okay, let's just say this. I was officially informed probably about 5 months later.
5 months. Okay, that's what I was getting at.
So, but I made the right choice for me. You gotta do what's in your heart. And at the heart of it, I love to lead people. That's what I'm really, really good at. I might have been a public affairs officer, and some people associate that with being a technical expert in a certain field. But what I've always done best is lead people. And so I had the opportunity to do that as a flag officer, having, big teams with big goals.
Not only lead people, at that level, and I know nothing about it. So you set policy at that level. You
advise. You advise on policy. You don't really set policy. I had a chance to work on some big policy issues when I was in the Secretary of Defense's office.
That touches tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah. And so that's part of being a leader in the military. You grow into those kinds of roles, and you're advising people who do set policy.
You don't have to name names, but I'm going to put you on the spot again, sir. What was a time when it was a personal, person-to-person, just tough interaction that you had to lead? You didn't see eye to eye with somebody. You didn't get along with somebody. 30 years, there had to have been a few.
I'm going to tell you something, David. I think that at the heart of it, okay, so let's do this. I would tell you there are a couple of different pieces to my career, right? I served in the military for a long time. I now serve in the civilian sector. I am deeply involved in some nonprofit work around the veterans workforce development space, making sure veterans have careers and job opportunities, and I also have a role in my company as the head of military and veterans engagement for Arizona's largest energy company, clean energy company, Arizona Public Service. And I would tell you that I've had some challenging experiences. I've certainly had more challenging experiences working in the civilian and nonprofit sector than I had in the military.
Wow.
And let me tell you why. It's not, I'm not trying to say that the military system of leadership is better than other systems, but it takes individuals and it brings them up in a certain system, and a certain type of behavior is expected from those individuals. And look, it can be tough, it can be hard-nosed, it can be head-to-head, but at the end of the day, it's collaborative. And you walk off into the sunset and you execute when the boss says execute. You know, in the civilian sector, you can run into issues like people who, for example, dig in their heels and don't want to work with you, like staff members. Or you can run into individual bosses who can be extreme micromanagers, which is absolutely not the way that I do business. And it just makes, you know, you're getting your job done a lot harder. But at the end of the day, if you fall back on those values that I talked about earlier, one, sort of your own honor and integrity, the way that you do business. Two, your network that may help you and advise you and mentor you through a tough situation. And three, being persistent. I got to make sure I got three fingers up there. Being persistent in every time, you know, in dealing with that person or that individual, you know, you continue on. You don't shrink from the fight. You know, as we say, you run to the sound of the guns, right? You know, it's not about going head to head with somebody, but it's about engaging in an intellectual way and being persistent in carrying on.
Yes.
And I think I can think of a couple of instances that were challenging after I've taken off the uniform, and in all those instances, sort of those values that I talked about really kind of carried me through.
So you took off the uniform. Tell me about your transition out.
It was tough. I mean, you know, you'll have these friends, all of whom, you know, are still wearing the uniform or whatever. They haven't made the transition themselves, and they'll say, "Oh, you're gonna have no problems. You know, you're an admiral. You're gonna have no problems." But it doesn't work that way, because there are different things. There are different skills that are prevalent in the civilian workforce that aren't prevalent in the military. You know, in the military community. The military community is great. It's amazing at collaboration, and people are willing to work together and deal with each other regardless of differences. And they don't hold grudges, and you move forward, generally speaking. In this, and it's at the end of the day, in the military, it's about execution. It's about getting the mission done. That's what matters. In the civilian workforce, there's an element of looking good and sounding good. That's about how you impress those around you.
Sure.
And the networking piece that you're never taught in the military, because that's not something you do.
Interesting.
Okay, so that's called fraternization in the military, and it's against military rules.
Fraternization
in
the
civilian workforce,
networking.
that's how you get ahead, and so that's a challenge. And being able to just, you know, so there are different systems, and it's not that one is better than the other. It's just it's different, and if you want to transition from one to the other, you've got to learn the other system.
Interesting. You got to learn the other system. Wrap this up. We live in the great state of Arizona.
Absolutely.
Most of the guests flew in. We have the luxury, I'm going to say, to live here. The weather's great most months out of the year. But what are you doing in Arizona? There's a lot of veterans in Arizona. There's a lot of support here in Arizona for veterans.
Yeah.
Paint that picture.
First of all, 1 in 10 adults in the state of Arizona is either a veteran or currently serving. 680,000. We have about 6 million adults in the state, so 1 in 10.
It's a big deal.
It's a very veteran-heavy state.
Wow.
We've, in working with the governor's office and one of the major nonprofits, the Arizona Coalition for Military Families, we created the Arizona Corporate Council on Veteran Careers back in 2016, which is an organization. It's comprised of some of the biggest companies in the state of Arizona that employ veterans. And we're really about fostering an environment that and an understanding and a learning to some extent for corporations, for companies, to understand the value that veterans bring to the workforce. You know, that sort of mission focus, that honor, courage, and commitment kind of thing. The ethos, that ethos that the military member brings to the civilian workforce. And so we're doing a number of things around that.
Do you think veterans are often misunderstood in the workforce?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so we're trying to help employers better understand the value. I mean, Duke University just last year did a study of civilian corporations, and even in companies that supposedly have veteran hiring preferences, there's still a systemic bias against veterans from those who haven't served. I mean, that's what the research shows. It's not me. It's not Hal saying it. It's what the research shows. And so we're trying to help educate, on that front.
What can the veteran do better to take more charge, to give themselves a leg up, to get hired and
learn your business, learn your business and create relationships with all those people around you.
I didn't know you were going to say that, but let me tell you something. At 28 years old, I was running a tech startup. On paper, we got valued at 2.1, venture back, $2.1 million. Biggest crash and burn ever. I won't go into it, but the reason the company failed, because I didn't know my business.
Yeah.
I had no clue what I was doing. I had no business running that company. I had no business starting that company. All the above. So I'm glad you said that.
You got to educate yourself, man. You've got to educate yourself.
I can talk for the rest of the day.
Learn whatever business that is. Just learn about it. Learn as much as you can. Be voracious. Have an open mind. Read. Absorb the information around you. Learn from other people. Bring on more mentors that can help you understand.
I literally feel like I've had the same conversation with myself, and I can't believe you're saying that, right? I could not agree more. We got to wrap this up. I wish we could talk all day. In conclusion, we had some people write in, and I just have to ask this. This is not my question. This is an anonymous, I think, Air Force veteran out of Texas, or I forget, to be honest. What's a
second best veteran state, by the way?
Texas?
Yeah. We have a healthy back and forth with them because they like to say that they're the most veteran friendly. So.
Interesting. So are there coalitions like yours in a lot of states trying to do this?
They just created one, yeah.
In Texas?
Yep.
How do we pull this together on a national level? Or is that even a...
We need to. And maybe, so like I work with a number of organizations here in the state of Arizona that have sort of a national focus as well on the veterans, on the veterans hiring front. I think there are organizations out there that could be that umbrella. Like one of your guests is going to be AP Powell from the Arizona Foundation. I think that they could help with that. I think there are others that could help with that, focusing on bringing the different organizations from the different states together, because then what you get is cross-pollination of veterans from different states that look for job and work opportunities and veteran-friendly companies. And you know what? The cream always rises to the top. We live in a meritocracy, David. And so, those companies that are really not talking about it, not talking a great game about supporting veterans, but really are supporting veterans, they will rise to the top.
That's true.
And it's important that we share that information so other vets are knowledgeable about it.
What's a tactical piece of advice? This is the question from our anonymous write-in. Not like work harder or anything like that. What's a tactical piece of advice you would give your 30-year-old self?
God, I sound like a broken record today, but you know what? I got to go back to persistence, David. Never, ever give up.
And a lot of times...
Never give up. People settle. That's why they're not more successful than they are. The most successful people in history are those who were driven and had an outsized intent to do something in a particular field, whether it's sports or entertainment or veteran workforce development or driving an entrepreneurial company in a certain direction, creating products and services that consumers want. Whatever that is, the people who have been hugely successful never gave up. They had X number of failures, and they kept on going.
Yeah, it gets hard.
They stayed in the fight.
For every reason under the sun, people give up. Financial,
omnipotent.
Emotional. You got to just stay in the fight.
Persistence is everything. It's the most important ingredient. It's absolutely the 100%. Most important ingredient.
Well, I want to wrap this up by saying, and I wasn't going to do this, but you really struck a chord in me and got me wild up. Veterans, learn your craft, especially if you're in business or entrepreneurship. Learn your craft. The get up early, the work hard, the wake up at 5 a.m., that's all fine and dandy. Sure, watch those motivational videos, but learn and study your craft. Take it from him, take it from me. Arizona, let's continue to support our veterans. It's a big deal. Let's support the community. Sir, thank you so much.
David, thank you. Great being on the show.
Awesome.